If you want to leave a comment on this video, here's how.
Follow the link in the description to our blog and leave a comment there. All you have to do is make a fandom account and you're good to go.
You can also follow the link to our tweet at TTTECradio and reply to that.
We can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Hello everybody, it is HiroTheJapaneseTrain here, aka Matt.
And Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
And welcome to the 10th episode of Character Gallery. It seems crazy that just a short time ago we were doing Salty, and now we're already here with the golden strips around the thumbnail.
Yeah, we're 10 episodes in, and what Matt and I have decided is that every 10 episodes we want to kind of make an event of it. And we want to kind of choose a character that's like really high profile, really famous, right? I'm thinking characters like Flying Scotsman, City of Tole, Stepney, yeah. And it's like today we decided we wanted to do Mallard because that's one of the most famous engines of all time. Holds the world speed record for steam engines.
And she's deeply connected to the Thomas universe.
Yeah,
sister to Spencer, Gordon. There's the whole Gresley family. And
we see Mallard in Thomas and the Great Railway Show. And I think long before that, her existence was already implied. Because, if you've got Flying Scotsman in the universe, if you've got Trudeau in the universe...
She had been mentioned previously, indirectly, in other books.
Yeah, Gordon says, one of my Doncaster cousins broke the record over on the East Coast, or something to that effect. I think he says it in Gordon the High-Speed Engine. So it's funny that I
think it's really funny because knowing Gordon and knowing Gordon's relationship with Spencer, and I think, well, we'll talk about this, the relationship between the A3s and A4s as a whole. It's really funny that Gordon chooses to mention Mallard mostly to beef up his own pride. And there's definitely something to be said that, Mallard is one of the quintessential steam locomotives of all time.
Yeah.
The engines on the Northwestern, even in their own universe, are insanely popular. But, Mallard is the one that's on the front covers of books.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Magazines 10-fold, 100-fold to anything of the Sodor engines.
It's very interesting because the engines on Sodor, once the railway series starts picking up, and I imagine especially when the TV series came out, became just famous, right? Because that, unlike a lot of shows, that fame actually exists within the universe and the characters react to it. You see that in stories like 8 Famous Engines. You see that in stories like those in Small Railway Engines where, you have the thin clergyman coming to write a book about everybody. It's the engine's fame actually catches up to them. And so, today, I have no doubt that Thomas is the most famous steam engine in the history of the world. I don't think anyone's contesting that.
Yeah.
However, it's a very different type of fame. Just from the Railway series and from Thomas and Friends, Gordon would be very famous. But I wonder if he would be proud of that fame, because it's mainly with preschoolers. So I think Mallard would be a lot more prestigious than Gordon in some ways, because Gordon is famous through those kids' books. Mallard is famous because she broke the record.
Yeah, Mallard is like the Forbes 500 list.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it's and it makes me wonder, I do wonder how Mallard would handle this fame, because once she breaks the record, when does she break the record? When is
1938, 3rd of March, or no, I'm sorry. She was built on the 3rd of March, 1938, and then...
3rd of July, 1938. So yes. I think you were right.
I said... I got the year right, and then I went on to say, March 3rd, and I was like, wait, that's the build date.
Matt, we were talking earlier about how Gordon was rebuilt in 1939.
I could see a case where they see Mallard break this record a year earlier, and they're like, my goodness, we need to step it up here.
Yeah, I could imagine if that was the case, if Gordon was okay.
There's such a degree of competition between the A3s and A4s, and this, you could write a book on this, especially with the Thomas universe. And this goes back to when Mallard was built. You think about the A3s have about 15 years on the A4, and then the A4 comes out, and it's like, oh my god. Like, the A4s to me are the pinnacle of 1930s railway technology.
Yeah, and the A3s, A1s, they're like a 20s thing. They ruled the 20s.
Yeah.
And then the A4s come along, and they are in every way the replacements for the A3s. Now, the A3s stick around, right? And in fact, the A3s and the A4s stuck around for an impressively long time. I mean, they were very well-designed engines, clearly.
But, of course, only one A3 survived it, and I think only seven, if you count Spencer, A4s survive it.
Yeah. It's interesting that, I mean, that would make Gordon even more bitter, the fact that, you know, so many A4s survive relative to his brothers.
Well, get this. So far to our knowledge, Gordon has not met Mallard.
That's true. That's very interesting.
Thomas has been the only one that has met Mallard.
That's weird. I kind of like to think, though, that...
Somewhere along the line, Mallard may be visited.
Yeah, or Gordon visited Mallard somehow. But at any rate, I like to think that Gordon has met sometime in the 30s, for whatever reason, Gordon has had the opportunity to meet members of his class and his cousins' classes that he wouldn't have met when they were built. But at any rate, I think they would know a lot about each other. Because, I mean, the A1s and A3s would talk about Gordon all the time. He was their prototype. He was their founder, essentially. And they would have great respect for him. And I could see Mallard just having no respect at all and just being like, well, he paved the way for us, perhaps. However, we've made it to the present. And we've, I feel like...
They would view him as, when you look at the Darwinian evolution, they would view him as the monkey before.
Yeah, that's the thing. They would look at him like, they would look at him like a step in their evolution.
He's a Neanderthal to them.
Yeah, and they would use that word, too. Like, I could just see Mallard just being like, well, he may be something to you, but to us, he's simply a Neanderthal. Say it without the TH. but like, we're kind of presuming that Mallard is arrogant. I mean, there's cases to be made that that's not the case. Like, right rolling out of the works. Did Mallard come from Doncaster, or was that...
Doncaster, yeah. I mean, I would argue that Mallard has an evolution, and I think it would be useful to go back to her early life. So,
when is she built? In
3rd of March, 1938.
And where is that relative to the other A4s?
Mallard was one of the last 6, I want to say. The last ones ever built were Mallard, then Gadwall, then Pochard, Garganey, Ganay, Capercaillie, I don't know, I'm butchering some of these names, Seagull, and then Peregrine. And they were all built within the same time frame. Peregrine, the last A4, was completed just 2 days before the record-breaking run.
So she's actually really late in the production cycle. That's
very much so.
That's kind of a surprise. So she's almost kind of like the baby of the family. But also...
She's the child actor.
Like, I could almost see a situation where they kind of, like, early on they realize that she's more capable of high speeds than the rest of them, but only very slightly. So they kind of pressure her to kind of refine her skills and pressure her to kind of get faster and actually, like, break a record, actually make a name for all of them. So they can ride on that. And they can say, oh, well, we're the fastest class of steam engine ever built. You can't get rid of us, right? And so she's kind of got this pressure on her to actually accomplish something great and kind of run herself ragged trying to break a record. And she actually manages to do it.
Am I reading this right? Or I think Mallard was actually damaged during the record run.
That's interesting. If that's the case, that's kind of sad, because it's like, here's how this is just developing, but I'm just kind of spitballing here, but here's what I'm kind of feeling like the A4s are like. I think the A1s and A3s, while they are very disciplined, are more like a loving family that kind of supports each other, and but I think the A4s...
The A4s are not sentimental.
Yeah, I think they might be really vicious. They might be like that family that, like, really, really pushes the kid too hard and forces them to get the best grades.
Yeah, think about the period they were built in. So, this is right before World War II. The Germans contested Mallard's run because a DRG Class 5 of their own hit 124.5 miles an hour. Mallard's was 126. Going on a horizontal versus a gradient, and they contested Mallard's record run. And the A4s are kind of built as a response to these high-speed German engines.
Yeah.
So there's a wartime atmosphere here, and that the A4s, they're the ones that have to be warlike. They have to be the face of British engineering.
I feel like there would be immense pressure then on all of these engines. And I feel like the earlier ones, the older engines from, like the first kind of set of them, like Silverlink and all the others, from the early days of the A4s, I feel like they might put like a lot of pressure on the younger engines, and kind of there'd be this dynamic in the A4 family where they're all driven to succeed at any cost, even if they have to be cutthroat, even if they have to be really brutal and vicious. They'll do it because they need to win. That's what they're built to do, is win. The A1s and A3s were built to be effective engines and serve their country, but...
Yeah, the A3s and the A1s were built in a triumphant time for Great Britain and for the railways in general. By the time of the late 30s, things are looking a lot more bleak, and, they're feeling a need to step up. This is a period of intense competition among not just the different railways, but across the globe for high-speed engines, especially...
what could be true, Matt, is that because I do see a fundamental difference in how the A1s and the A4s kind of operate as families. The A4s were they were just dead set on survival, and they were very kind of, and I'm sure that they were very vicious. I wonder if the A1s and A3s looked at how the A4s approached things and decided this might allow more of them to survive if they if they are more vicious like this, but we're not going to treat our brothers and sisters this way. We're not going to be cutthroat like they are. We will accept our end if we have to. And they did. And maybe that's why the A3s and A1s had so few preserved. Maybe they didn't push each other as hard as the A4s did, because they didn't want to put each other through that. They didn't want to destroy their family, destroy their lives, just because they want to be immortal. They're obsessed with being immortal. I think the A4s really are obsessed with immortality. They see themselves as these futuristic machines that need to go on forever.
And and you think of it, A4s get sent across the world.
Yeah, they all get broken up, don't they?
They do.
It seems to me like the A4s were so focused on survival, so focused on winning, and so focused on proving their worth, that they didn't focus on each other. If an A4 came back to the yard and was late on an express run, I think that they'd get shouted at. I think that it'd probably be, we're better than that! You can't be like them! That sort of thing.
Well, I can imagine... Think of Mallard in this position. Mallard, she's just come off the production line, and she's thrown to this immense pressure. I think maybe in the months after she was built, before the trial, before the record run, maybe she is friendly to a couple other engines, older engines.
And that's immediately hammered out of her.
Because... Yeah, I'm imagining a scene where, I don't know, take Bittern. I like the example of Bittern just because Bittern survived. Where whatever. But Bittern sees Mallard in the yard talking to this older engine, this gentle engine, and says, "Mallard, get over here! Right this instant! You cannot be consorting with them! You have a standard! You're better than this!"
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. Where it's like, because I think the A1s and A3s, I think, would be fairly elitist in the way they view the world and think they're the best, but the A4s would be even worse. They would be like, if the A1s and A3s think they're the best and boast about it, the A4s would prefer a world where all the other types of engine just kind of went away.
It is funny, isn't it? Because the A1s, when they were built, they had to really earn the position that they held. They had to beat out, the Raven A2. The A4s, the only thing that they need to do is punch down.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because they piggybacked on what the A3s and A1s did. They may look a lot different, but they're very, very similar locomotives. I mean, the streamlining throws you off, but underneath, they're not all that different.
Yeah, and that has to do with the fact that, the A1s could feel much more of a sense of accomplishment because they actually beat out competition right around them. Whereas the A4s, their competition is abroad. Their competition are, oh, the engines in Germany are faster than us. We must beat them.
It's so much more pretentious. It's so much more surface level with the A4s. So what I'm hearing so far is that Mallard is built, and initially, like anybody, I mean, she starts out innocent, and she doesn't really...
She forms connections with other engines that get beaten out of her.
Yeah, and she's born basically into this really cutthroat family that is obsessed with success, obsessed with legacy, obsessed with immortality.
Obsessed with victory.
Yeah, obsessed with victory is the best way to put it. The minute, it's like a shark smelling blood in the waters, that the minute that they realize that...
It helps that they look kind of like sharks.
The minute that they realize that Mallard is faster than the rest of them, they just hone in on that, and they just force her to practice as much as possible and get faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
And eventually she breaks the record, and she breaks it forever. But she also injures herself. It's not good for her.
Well, and then when she's preserved, she never runs again.
That's the thing, is that later on, I mean, she's, like, modern day, Mallard is probably never going to run again. Because she's to the point where if they rebuild her anymore, she'll probably be a different engine. It's interesting because I feel like if, say, Gordon comes along in the 40s and meets her for the first time, by that time she's very convinced of the A4 kind of mentality. Then we hit the 60s and they start getting withdrawn. And, you know, it hits her hard, but I think, unlike the A1s and A3s, I think the A1s and A3s would kind of all come together and just kind of embrace
It's the scene in Toy Story 3 when they're all in the furnace.
It's like that, where they just kind of embrace each other and they're like, we're ready for the end. Whereas the A4s would be desperately... It's like having a huge family with not enough food. And they're just desperately grabbing for what they can get, and it's like, they're desperately...
They're pushing other people, you know...
Yeah, I feel like early...
They're sending others to the sidings.
Yeah, I feel like early on in dieselization, the A4s would kind of... They would kind of try to discredit the A3s and A1s, which would probably lead inevitably to none of them getting put on the list, the preservation list. But then, slowly, they run out of A1s and A3s to frame, and they're like, there's still a lot of us, and we can't all survive. When they run out of engines to turn traitor on, I think they turn traitor on each other. And so it's interesting, and this was probably why the A4s split up.
Makes me think a lot about that photo they all took together.
Yeah, the thing is, they probably were desperately grabbing for any foothold to get preserved, right? And they probably tried to... I'm sure there were times when Mallard tried to betray Bittern, and there were times when Dominion of Canada tried to betray...
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yeah, and they just like...
It must have looked so pathetic being a diesel, and it would have probably confirmed their biases a lot more.
Yeah, exactly.
See the A4s like in such a feudal position.
Yeah.
And you know what's their reward for it? Their reward for it is being, most of them, laid up in a museum for the rest of their lives.
And I think the worst part too is that their relationships would all be destroyed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because the thing is, Scotsman still has Gordon. He still has Green Arrow. You know, he has engines like that.
Yeah.
And he's lost a lot, but at least he has them. And they're still on his side. They're still family. I don't think the A4s talk to each other. I don't think that they have any respect for each other. I think that they're all really bitter about what has happened in the past. I think they all probably betrayed each other at some point or another because they were focused on survival. They weren't focused on family.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because, like you mentioned earlier, like when they all get together, when they got together a few years ago to reunite all the A4s, that was really uncomfortable for all of them. They probably didn't want to be reunited. They're probably like, oh, you did this to me, and you did this to me. You tried to get me scrapped then. Well, you tried to get me scrapped then. You tried to prove that I was worthless. Like, it's probably a really uncomfortable gathering for them to all see each other again.
You think of it, and you can't help but think of Gordon's position in all this. And he's looking on this conflict from the outside in. These people that are continuously fighting, constantly holding resentments from the past, and he and Scotsman are just like, gosh, if only we could have had Flying Fox back.
Yeah, that's the thing.
If only we could have had Pretty Polly here today. That must make the A3s, or Gordon and Scotsman, extremely resentful. But they don't. And props to them for I don't think that they would show it.
Yeah, the thing is, I think before dieselization, Scotsman would have been really pretentious.
Oh,
like
yeah.
all the A3s and A1s.
Yeah, and then they start going on the sidings, and he goes through so much and sees a lot of it firsthand that Mallard probably didn't. I imagine.
I'm sure that Mallard saw just as much awful stuff during dieselization as Scotsman did. I think the difference is just where their pride came from. And it's the fact that Mallard and her whole class had this image built up. And the A1s and A3s are very grand, but, you know, there's a reason why, even though the A4s are a lot more impressive, it seems to me like Britain, and by extension the world, has more love for the A3s.
Yeah.
Like, they have more love for Flying Scotsman. There's something more...
It's such a more compelling story, the whole Alan Pegler and Scotsman thing, and it says a lot more about Scotsman as a character than Mallard just immediately being put on a list. First one in a lifeboat.
You know, but it's interesting because, you know, so eventually what happens is all the A4s, they're all at different corners of the world and probably glad about it because they don't want to talk to each other anymore. And Mallard is all alone. And it's interesting because I think this is where she would start turning around a little bit.
I agree.
Because I think once she gets into preservation, firstly, she hits a point eventually. I think at first she kind of has a long time to think. While she can still run, I think that she's kind of still on the fence, like, you know, oh, screw all those other A4s, you know, for betraying me or whatever. Oh, you know, screw the A3s, you know, they didn't deserve to survive. Awful stuff, right? Awful justifications of the terrible things that went down during modernization. However, I think that once she loses the ability to move, once she...
You think of it, speed is the thing that made an A4 what it is. When they lose the thing that they've cherished the most and relied on for their identity.
In Mallard more than anybody, because Mallard she's known for that. And she can't do it anymore. And once she can't move anymore, once she is on static display, I think then she would finally have to kind of start thinking about... She'd have some time to think. She couldn't just run from it. She literally can't run from it anymore.
It has to be nerve-wracking, you know? Yeah. Especially, just think of the life of all of those engines in York, really. The ones that are just on static display.
I think what's very powerful and significant is the fact that Mallard is around a turntable with a bunch of engines very close by them. Mm-hmm. They're probably all trying to comfort each other about all the things that they've lost. They're probably trying to stay positive.
And they've all lost siblings, no matter how many. And Mallard, with the privilege that she has, comes into this position having probably more brothers than many of those other engines. Many of those other engines being the sole survivor of their class or whatnot. And she has to confront her privilege.
At first, I think she would look at everyone there as inferior. But slowly she would realize that she can't even run. She can't even, most of her class was scrapped for a reason. And she would have to slowly realize that even if she thinks she's better than all of them, that's not going to serve her. Because she's all alone here in a room full of engines. But she can't connect with any of them because she thinks that she's superior. You know, her soul is just rotting inside because she's just dealing with these issues that she developed in the late 30s. You know, I mean, she's all this time she's been believing these awful things that the A4s taught her, and she holds these values that are just so wrong. She was just so focused on this one singular goal of survival and victory, at the expense of all other engines, to the point where I think she was just disassociated. I'm sure the A4s would look at, if you look at like an 060 built in the late, they would look at like an engine as old as Douglas and think like, well, I mean, that's...
Dinosaur.
Yeah, he's had his time. He doesn't really matter anymore. And they'd be taught to kind of not think about the humanity in a lot of engines.
Right.
And I think that Mallard, probably before coming to York, she probably never had to talk to engines that weren't A4s. It was probably just like you have a tank engine come up and silently shunt your coaches, and they just kind of know, well, you don't talk back to A4s.
Yeah, you don't talk to Mallard.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's
don't speak unless spoken to.
Yeah, it's this kind of awful caste system. And so Mallard, for the first time, could kind of be confronted. And there'd just be engines, there'd be all sorts of engines, scrappy little engines that are from the late 1800s, who just be like, well, come on, say something. And Mallard just glares at them. And they're just like, well, you're not going anywhere, so you might as well. She wouldn't have a choice, really. At some point, she would have to confront the fact that they are engines just like her. That at this point, the world looks at them as equally outdated. And, really, she is all alone and desperate for connection with somebody. And really, she's been all alone since the 30s. She's been all alone since the beginning, because the A4s were never really a family. She didn't learn the necessary emotional tools that an engine would need.
Yeah, she was forbidden from forming them by her militaristic family.
Yeah.
And that's the single biggest tragedy. I never grappled with how tragic of a character Mallard is, but that really is the case. And I can't help but thinking about Spencer in all this.
Yeah, I was about to bring up Spencer, because the big reason I feel that the A4s are like this, and that they have this kind of elitist kind of...
Spencer is a big look into it.
Yeah, because, just the way that the biggest thing, I think, is the way he acts in Hero of the Rails. And I think the key here is, it's not just that he dislikes Hero, right? Not just that he wants him scrapped because he did something to him or he hates him. It's because he thinks, I am superior to Hero. He is inferior to me. And so he shouldn't exist anymore. We should destroy him because he's inferior to me. And here's the thing. If Spencer thinks that, right, who put that idea in his head? Who put the idea in his head that A4s are superior to everybody else? His type of engine is superior.
Not only that, but the fact that there's no room for weaklings.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, if Spencer thinks that, and that's something that applies to him not because he's Spencer, but because he is a streamlined engine built to his design that is that impressive, then the other A4s have to think that too. And it's in line with what very little we see of Mallard in Thomas and the Great Railway Show. We know at least that she's very arrogant. We know at least
she's looking off to the side, not even bothering to look at Thomas.
Yeah, and she basically, she automatically assumes she's going to get a special train, and everybody there, I think the most telling line is that the narration says everybody there wished that she wouldn't.
Yeah.
Which to me sounds like no one there likes her. We don't have a lot on who the A4s are, but I think Spencer gives us a great look into it. And I think just the fact that Spencer is coming from a place of my class is superior, my type of engine is superior, and not I'm superior.
He's appropriating Mallard's excellence in that too. And he's using that to make an argument that... And this shows how different the concept of useful engine can mean to so many different engines. Taking this idea of what a useful engine is to him and is using it to basically deny Hero's right to exist.
And the scary thing is that all of Britain kind of backs it because they all, all these rail fans, everybody who just rides the railway and sees Mallard on the posters and everything, they reaffirm what Spencer believes. And of course they don't realize the effect that it's having on these engines. However, it is scary because Spencer isn't necessarily wrong. A lot of people do think that he's the best, and that if you're going to preserve Hero or Spencer, obviously, without a doubt, you preserve Spencer. And that is really dangerous thinking.
Yeah.
He believes that we should weed out all the engines that are considered to be weaker, that are considered to be worthless. And he just made up that distinction. That's his idea. However, it doesn't matter. He's going to enforce it no matter what. The climax of the movie is about Spencer trying to get Hero killed.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the other A4s, at least some of them must hold this mentality. And I think it would be all of them because Spencer got these values from what he is and from the mentality surrounding being an A4.
And it's such a toxic environment. And Spencer really does exemplify this. And it makes me think about, how Spencer in particular would get on with Mallard. There's some differences here, because Spencer being the private engine, but still running, maybe in the current day, Mallard would be resentful of that.
I think that she would resent Spencer, especially when, I would love to see, because I feel like just Scotsman's at York a lot, and Mallard is always there. I'm imagining Scotsman, moves in and out of the big main shed of the NRM every day, right? And he sees Mallard just sitting there alone on a siding, and nobody's talking to her. And, Scotsman, one day he decides, like, you know what? Everybody's dead. Why don't we just try to reconnect? And so he goes over there and tries to talk to her, and he's just like, "Are you lonely?" And Mallard's just like, "Lonely? Everybody knows who I am. I have millions of fans. How could I be lonely?" And the Scotsman's just like, "Having millions of fans doesn't mean you're not lonely. I get lonely a lot of the time. I mean, I have a lot of fans as well, not to toot my own whistle, but I do. And, well, I deeply miss my family. I've got lots of good friends here, certainly, but there are times I feel terribly lonely. And I'm one of the most famous engines in the world." And Mallard just kind of looks up at him. Like, she wouldn't open up the first time, but she would kind of start warming up, and they'd kind of keep having these little conversations where Scotsman would say something, would, like, give a speech of some kind, and Mallard would say, like, a little bit, but not that much, like, because she's just kind of, it's a lot for her to even talk to Scotsman. And then slowly, there would just be one night, I think, where the two of them would just be somewhere alone, and they'd just be kind of silent side by side. They'd both be parked there by coincidence. It would be really awkward.
Yeah.
Like, Scotsman wouldn't say anything out of respect. He knows Mallard probably doesn't want to talk. And they've just been sitting there for a few hours. Scotsman...
I could imagine Mallard would break the silence to say...
Yeah, exactly.
It would be a very deeply emotional scene. Like, I can imagine Mallard would really open up and get emotional.
Yeah, I think what would happen... I feel like she would just be like, when I was built, and Scotsman would look over like, "Wait, what?" But he would, he wouldn't say anything. He would listen, right? And Mallard would just be like, when I was built, I didn't look down on other engines. That wasn't my natural tendency. But well, I learned quickly that you need to. You have to look down on other engines if you want to survive. And so I did. I looked at myself as superior because, well, look at me, Scotsman. How could I not be? And Scotsman's just like, well, superior means different things to different people. And Mallard just kind of looks at him, and it's like, it would be like a really slow, sad scene where she would actually finally open up and kind of start acknowledging that, like, the reason that she holds the beliefs she does isn't because they're innate. It's because they were hammered into her.
She was taught, yeah, it would be, and I think this resonates with so many people just in general, just the fact that she was raised in an environment where she had to learn to hate.
Yeah.
And I think it would forever change how she viewed her family from that moment on.
What would be amazing as the end of Mallard's arc is if Scotsman helps her to realize that her mentality is flawed, and then she brings the whole family back together one by one.
For that photo.
That would actually be pretty good. She
comes full circle.
Yeah, like she orchestrates the whole thing, right? Like she comes up with the idea of getting them all back together. Maybe she goes and talks to like Sir Nigel Gresley and a few of the British A4s that are in Britain. And then so everyone comes together, right? And they're all like, "Hold on, you're here? I thought there was only going to be 3 of us."
She arranges it as a surprise.
And Mallard just blows her whistle, just long and loud, right? And that's a commanding whistle. She's just like, "Silence!" And they all stop because they listen to Mallard. She's just like, "I didn't bring you all here so we could fight." And Sir Nigel Gresley is just like, "Isn't that what we do?" and Mallard's just like, "Not this week." I'm picturing like, they are all moved into the National Railway Museum around the turntable, and Mallard speaks.
She's on the turntable, spinning around.
and she can actually move when she's on the turntable. So it's kind of like her getting some of her agency back because she can actually she's actually spinning around looking at all of them. And it kind of reflects the fact that she's got more agency now that she's kind of overcome the values that were kind of holding her back. And so she's talking to all of them. I can imagine they go into the shed, right? And Mallard kindly speaks to, like, the engines who are around the turntable, who are chatting, and she's like, "I hate to ask this of you, but could you clear out? We need to have a talk." And and so, you know, which she never would have done years ago. She would have been like, get out of our turntable. But like, you know, here I think, you know, they're all like, all right, Mallard, we'll go. And so like the engines around the turntable leave, right? And then the other A4s are disgusted. They're like, did you just ask politely? And and the thing is, Spencer would be at this too, because unlike the real world,
Spencer would be like, why don't they know their betters?
Yeah, and Mallard would just be like, Spencer, shut up. And,
yes.
And she'd get on the turntable, right? You know, I like the idea that Mallard was the first to break the record, and now she's the first to break the silence.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, she basically, you know, she brings them all back together because she realizes that that's what's best for all of them. And they're all around the turntable, and at this meeting, they don't all agree by the end of it. It's not like they're all brought around, right?
Right.
And I think it took Scotsman years to kind of bring Mallard around. And not just Scotsman. I bet Gordon came to the NRM a few times and repaired...
Mallard is in such a unique position where she's had... Even Thomas. Where there must have been something... Granted, Thomas is an egotistical hothead, but there must have been something about Thomas's charm and character that thawed Mallard even a little bit.
I also love the idea that Thomas got to meet Mallard and Green Arrow, because...
Yeah.
I see Gordon a lot like kind of a loose father figure to Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And meeting Mallard and meeting like Spencer and meeting Scotsman and meeting...
He's meeting the family, kind of. Quasi-family.
Yeah, it's meeting them all. He would get a different perspective on Gordon. Because maybe I could imagine maybe when Thomas leaves for York, he's really pissed off at Gordon because, like, Gordon's just been such a jerk about him going. And Thomas is like, why can't he just be supportive? Why can't he just be happy for me that I'm famous and that he was wrong about me? And you know, Mallard just laughs. She's like... And Thomas is just like, what's so funny? And Mallard's just like, you think that Gordon's going to admit all that?
Yeah.
You really are daft. But then, and at first, it sounds like she's just like, you know, Gordon will never have that respect for you. But then Thomas chimes in like, you know, like, well, he should say all of that. I mean, when is he going to learn to respect me? I mean, when is he going to finally say, Thomas, I respect you? And Mallard's like, he's not going to ever do that, Thomas. And then Thomas is like, why? And Mallard's like, because he already does. And then Thomas just kind of... It goes from mad to just, like, surprised. And he's like, wait a minute. I'm expecting Gordon to finally show respect to me after all these years. It's just that he doesn't have the emotional tools to do it. Gordon can't say, Thomas, I'm sorry. I was wrong.
But Mallard has the foresight to just say, Thomas, you idiot. He already admires you so much.
And even though this is because this is in 1991, so this is while Mallard is still kind of in her arrogant phase. Mm-hmm. She's getting better, but I think she's still in her arrogant phase. Yeah. Because the big meeting of A4s is like in 2016.
Yeah, it's recent.
So it's like she's got a while yet until she finally comes around. And I think it's like 20 years of talking to Green Arrow, Scotsman, Gordon, you know, not Spencer. Spencer was worse. But like, you know, I do think that even though she's still in her arrogant phase when she meets Thomas, even though she's like, she would speak disparagingly about Gordon, but she unknowingly provides deep insight into Gordon's nature that Thomas did not understand before. Yeah. Because Gordon never explains really... Gordon explains the good side of where he came from. Gordon explains the good things about the A1s and the A3s, but
he never talks about his failures.
Yeah, and he never talks about the fact that, like, you know, he was taught... Because the A1s and A3s, they're not as bad as the A4s, but they're still really elitist. They still have this horrible prejudice towards tank engines, and you know, they believe a lot of awful stuff. And, you know, and Mallard is able to provide the insight to say, like, you know, Gordon is a little bit messed up, and he can't own up to it, and he would apologize to you if he could, but he can't. So he does care about you, Thomas. He does respect you, but he can't admit that he was wrong about you, and wrong about you getting your branch line, wrong about you being able to become famous, wrong about you doing big things, because it would destroy his confidence.
He can't get past the little engine part either.
Yeah, and but he deep down does respect Thomas. And I feel like there would be an exchange like that happens at York. The way I would frame Thomas and the Great Railway Show is that Thomas has a massive fight with Gordon before going. and he's angry when he gets there, and he's just like still simmering on Gordon. And then he's in the perfect situation to meet all of Gordon's family. He meets Mallard, he meets Green Arrow, he meets Scotsman, he meets all of these engines that give him a totally different outlook on Gordon. And then Thomas comes back home, and the things that Gordon says, the way that he acts, they still frustrate him, but he understands now. He realizes where he gets where Gordon came from. He gets Gordon's language, kind of. Like, he understands that when Gordon kind of corrects Thomas on something stupid and does it in a really rude way, that's kind of him trying to lead him in the right direction because he cares about him. It's not just him being a jerk.
It helps him realize that Gordon just has a lack of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and when Thomas realizes that he can tolerate Gordon a little bit more. And also, he realizes how messed up Mallard is, and he's like, well, that's... And I feel like when Thomas talks to Scotsman, that would be the real... Scotsman wouldn't be there for the first few months of Thomas's York visit, but then he'd arrive later. And Thomas will have talked to Green Arrow, but Green Arrow, he knows a lot about Gordon, but he only knows so much. He talks to Mallard, and Mallard knows a decent amount, but then Scotsman shows up and just ties it all together, and he's just like...
Scotsman and Thomas just, like, talking the night away in the sheds would be so great, because Gordon would be the focus of, like, 99% of that conversation.
It's a lot like Thomas meeting his aunts and uncles, and Scotsman is so much like Thomas's uncle. And you get a sense of this in the beginning of The Great Race. It really does feel that way. Even though Thomas is just meeting Scotsman in that, it's like the way that they interact, and Scotsman's kind of like, well, sport, you'll go far. And,
he's just so fun and supportive. And,
I know, exactly.
And he would be that way to Thomas just one-on-one. Like, the whole conversation, he would, And
Scotsman would just show the unbridled support for Thomas that Gordon can't. And I feel like that would mean a lot to Thomas to hear.
Yeah, that would be,
But the way that this all just ties back into Mallard is the fact that we have this very complex, interesting, just fascinating family system. Because it's like this big celebrity family almost. And yet the whole world knows them on a surface level. They know Mallard broke the record. They know that Scotsman...
and not only that, the whole world goes on around them, but not necessarily including them.
That's the thing. It's like, people don't know, what Mallard's relationship with her brothers and sisters is. They don't know what Scotsman's relationship with Gordon is. They just know, oh, we want to see these two together. Oh, we want to see these engines together. That's all they're thinking about. And the engines have to hash it out themselves, in wherever they happen to be and who they happen to be surrounded by. But I really do love that the idea of Mallard's arc being that from a young age, it is hammered into her that she has to kind of chase this victory.
Like the record breaker, like you said, she's the first one to break this mentality among her brothers and sisters.
Yeah, exactly. That she finally, her arc comes full circle where she corrects them for real and rather than them correcting her.
What I think is so significant about this is the fact that I don't think Spencer would ever break out of it.
I don't think so either.
And I think that makes Mallard a much stronger character. She is much more redeemable than Spencer, much stronger, much more admirable. And going into this, I have to say, I didn't really like Mallard's character. Spencer, we have so much more on Spencer. But then, I have thought about the A4 family and just, in depth. But I never really, until now, saw Mallard as breaking. I knew there must have been some sort of transition, but the fact that she could have broken this cycle is something I think is a lot of story value, and I think we have added a lot of weight to her character.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that Mallard, it's interesting because she's famous just decades and decades before this change in her personality. But I think in the, probably sometime after Thomas and the Great Railway Show, after the 90s, probably in the early 2000s is finally when Scotsman starts getting through to her. All the other engines start getting through to her, and she kind of starts warming up to everybody. And that's the point where she actually becomes admirable, where she actually deserves her title.
Yeah.
Not just because she was fast. I mean, that's not enough. That being one of the most famous engines in the world... I mean, she actually deserves that now because she actually has done some good things and she actually is a good influence and she actually has reformed in a great way.
In ways that Spencer will never. And ways that Spencer will always be blind to.
in these days, I think Spencer would try to, she would try to point out the fact that, you're nothing but a miserable coward, Spencer. You should know that the people around you are worth something. And Spencer's just like, as if I'm going to listen to you. You can't even drive.
Yeah.
You just sit there. Yeah. But I think that would have really bugged Mallard, years ago. But I think today she would just be like, I may not be able to drive, but at least I'm in control. And it's like, she doesn't, she's moved past that. She's come to terms with the fact that she doesn't run anymore, and she's okay with it. Because she's realized...
She's not living in fear.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the single biggest
and
plus.
she's realized that the A1s, to an extent, were right about the way that they lived things. And I think that, that Scotsman and Green Arrow and, and many others at the National Railway Museum were able to finally get through to her, probably over a long period of like 20 or 30 years at the National Railway Museum. And finally she was able to come around and realize that family is important, that treating others with respect and dignity and kindness is important, and she actually did reform, which was way, way harder than breaking 126 miles per hour.
Yeah.
I really love what we've come up with for her. I think that's really fascinating.
I'm dying to make a Mallard custom.
Of course you are.
I used to not really be, so into it, but now I'm
me neither, honestly. But now that we've actually talked about her more,
I really want to sit down and just start painting.
Because I just think we've made her so badass. Because it's like, I just thought before, it's like, oh, she broke a record, she was fast. She had the
we kind of
privilege
viewed
of being
her like
fast...
we view Spencer. We viewed her as an engine that had not really overcome so much adversity and was so privileged and gifted. But really, she was chained. And all of the rest of the A4s are chained by the past, by, hatred, by bigotry, and just by the toxic environment they were built in.
Yeah, and finally getting over that mentality is the end of their arc, where they can finally be happy with themselves. And, I think there will be a day in the far future, probably 50 years from now, but eventually they will all get over it. And I think that even Gordon will forgive them, even Scotsman will forgive them, for all the betrayals, all the cruelty, all the hurled insults and rudeness, and they'll all become one big family again. And it'll be far in the future, but it'll happen one day.
And I hope that they will, don't you?
All right, so I think we've said our piece then on Mallard.
Well, this has been a great episode 10. This was monumental for our series and for the character that we examined as a whole. And
we talked about a lot of different characters too. We touched upon a lot of the famous engines because it's kind of hard not to when Mallard, so much of her life is in the National Railway Museum. You kind of have to. But yeah, this has been a real Gresley episode, which I'm always a big fan of.
Oh, me too. I loved every moment of this. Well, this has been fantastic, and I can't wait to see what episode 11 is going to bring.
Yeah.
This series gets better and better.
Yeah, no, it does.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Matt, aka HiroTheJapaneseTrain. I flipped that, but whatever.
I'm Master of the Lemons, aka Lemmy.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you in the next one.
All right, see ya.